Hold on. Ahoy hoy, I'm Planet Walk, and today we are continuing on with the video that asks the question, what does it mean to be a flat earther? Well, I've already answered that, but let's continue.
Ball earthers believe that a comet, like Halley's Comet, can get yanked back every 75 years and catch right back up with a zooming solar system right on schedule.
So I'm not going to repeat everything that I said in my last video on Taboo Conspiracy. If you want to watch that, you can, should be up there. But the answer here is reference frames. In a reference frame where the center of the solar system is stationary, then Halley's Comet is just orbiting the center of the solar system. Simple.
They believe that even though the Earth is wobbling, spinning, and vortexing through the vacuum of space at insane speeds, that the North Star has never changed position in recorded history, simply because it's really, really, really far away.
Except you're just wrong there, because in about 3000 BC, the North Star was Alpha Draconis, not Polaris. And in about 13,000 years, the North Star will be Vega. Just because reality doesn't conform to how you expect it to conform to if it were a globe, doesn't mean that the globe is incorrect. It just means that your understanding is incorrect.
They believe that all of the wobbling, spinning, and vortexing through space cannot be felt, measured, or detected on Earth.
Except we can, because that's how we know that it's happening. Except flat earthers like to say, oh, trust your senses, and oh, we don't feel this because, surprise, it's really small and you need instruments to detect it. And when you have the correct instruments and you use them correctly, you can detect the motion of the Earth around the Sun, and you can detect the spin of the Earth.
Einstein himself said there was no optical experiment that can detect the Earth's motion.
So firstly, that quote is mostly in reference to the Michelson-Morley experiment. And secondly, even if there were no optical way to measure the motion of the Earth, there are other ways that you can measure it, like things weighing more at the poles than at the equator.
They believe that the moon appears reddish during a lunar eclipse because the sunrises and sunsets of the Earth are refracting onto the moon 234,000 miles away. That's stupid.
Firstly, that's what's happening. Just because you think it's stupid doesn't make it incorrect. Secondly, flat Earth has no credible alternative explanation for it.
They believe that a selenelion occurs because the sun and moon, which are both above the horizon, somehow aren't really there but only appear there because of refraction, which strangely only happens during a lunar eclipse.
Well, if you're saying that a selenelion occurs only during a lunar eclipse, then yeah, a lunar eclipse needs to be happening for a selenelion to take place. But if you're saying that refraction only takes place during a lunar eclipse, well, no. Refraction takes place all the time. In fact, a lot of the time when you're looking at the sun during sunset, that sun has already set, it just looks like it hasn't, because refraction. I don't think I've ever seen someone attempt to strawman the globe model as hard as Taboo Conspiracy is doing right now. But come on, Taboo Conspiracy, what other straw men do you have for us?
They believe that the sun and moon only appear to be the same size in our sky, based solely on an impossible coincidence. To understand the scale of this, for a tall 7'2" man representing the diameter of the sun, the ball earther would claim that the moon would have a mere diameter of the eraser on a pencil.
Well, they do have the same approximate angular size, but sometimes the moon is slightly smaller in angular size than the sun. Sometimes it's slightly bigger than the sun in angular size. And it's kind of hard to notice any difference in angular size between the sun and the moon just by looking at them with the naked eye. Because you'll go blind, and it's hard to notice any difference in angular size when you're blind. So the moral of the story here is don't flirf and look at the sun, because you'll go blind.
They believe that during a solar eclipse that the shadow of the moon, which is supposed to have a diameter of 2,159 miles, casts a shadow on Earth that is only 70 miles in diameter.
Except I've actually modeled this out, and it's exactly what you expect to happen if the sun is huge and the moon is admittedly pretty big, but nowhere near as big as the sun. Now this is a 2-scale representation of what you'd expect to see during a solar eclipse on a globe. Now the shadow of the moon may look a little bit big, but that's simply because it's difficult to tell where it switches from umbra to penumbra. And when they talk about the 70-mile shadow that the moon casts on the Earth, they're talking about the umbra, not the penumbra.
They believe that our pressurized atmosphere is adjacent to an inconceivably powerful vacuum without any effect whatsoever on our air supply or anything else.
Yet we have a pressure gradient that FLIRS just refused to give an adequate explanation for. Wonder why that is.
They believe that the Earth curves away from you at 8 inches per mile squared based on a ball Earth radius of 3,959 miles, and yet all the evidence demonstrates that we see way too far and there is no measurable curvature.
No, we don't believe that the Earth has a curvature of 8 inches per mile squared, because that creates a parabola. I gave the correct formula in the last video, and it's the formula that you should be using. As for all the observable evidence showing that we see too far, oh dear, looks like Taboo Conspiracy is wrong. Imagine my shock!
Whether you're at the surface filming across a body of water or in an airplane with an infrared camera, they believe that you can see way too far because the atmosphere has this magical ability to remove all evidence of the curvature and wraps distant objects around the curvature.
So there's something that you mentioned earlier, Taboo Conspiracy. What was it? Refraction. Yeah, that plays a part in these observations. As I've mentioned many times before, if light is bent towards the Earth, then objects will appear higher, and in some cases they will appear above the horizon when in reality they should be below the horizon. This is not something new, it's something that people have known about for ages, but flat earthers constantly ignore it, just like they ignore photos where you can't see objects due to curvature.
They want you to believe that if you were to stand on the west side of Utah Lake with binoculars, that the opposite eastern shore 13 miles away should be 70 feet below the horizon.
So, firstly, you've got to account for refraction. Secondly, you got to know what height you're actually looking at it from. And thirdly, you got to know the height of the thing that you're actually looking at. And you also have to know what you're actually looking at, because sure, it might look like the shore, but it might be too blurry to tell whether it actually is the shore or not.
They believe that all of our oceans are bendy and conform to the shape of a ball, but these bendy oceans simply disappear whenever you try to measure or detect them, and are certainly never encountered by naval forces.
You know, I'm gonna be honest here. I'm actually so fucking tired of explaining this one to flat earthers time and time again, so oh no, the people in that boat are in danger because the boat has obviously sunk because, as we all know, water is flat.
They believe that the bulge of the Earth can disappear and relocate many miles further while leaving objects in between unaffected, like in this infamous Black Swan video from BMLS B69.
Leaves objects in between unaffected. Ignoring the bendy cranes there. But yes, the Black Swan image has heavy atmospheric refraction, and it's been cherry-picked because that Black Swan image is not the norm. In fact, images like this are actually the norm when it comes to those oil platforms.
They believe that the only way to tell whether a distant boat is actually a mirage is by the curvature calculator.
No, that is not what we believe. The curvature calculator only tells us what we expect to see, it doesn't tell us what we actually are seeing. To determine what we are actually seeing, we use things like multiple observations, and Mick West has a great refraction simulator which can allow us to play with the atmospheric conditions to work out what we should be seeing, given a particular set of atmospheric conditions. And if the atmospheric conditions required to get a certain type of image on a flat Earth are laughable, then we can conclude that that image wasn't taken on a flat Earth, and was instead taken on a globe Earth.
They believe in the story of the lunar lander, which looks like it was shoddily made by a high school drama club, complete with black paper, tape, gold aluminum foil, and curtain rods, which somehow achieved speeds up to 4,000 miles per hour on descent and ascent, was never tested or flown on Earth, somehow didn't leave a blast crater, included enough room for a fold-up dune buggy, and had a miraculous air conditioning and fresh air system that could sustain life on the moon for more than 3 days.
So just because something looks like it was shoddily made doesn't necessarily mean that it was. And besides, if it were fake, with NASA's budget, don't you think they would have been able to make it look a bit fancier maybe? As for the lunar lander not leaving a blast crater, well, you wouldn't expect a blast crater from the lunar lander because even the prototypes that were tested here on Earth didn't leave a blast crater either. As for the dune buggy, well, that was very bare bones so that they could conserve space. As for the amount of oxygen, well, the astronauts would be trained to use less oxygen. Just like if you're doing diving professionally, you would have to use less oxygen so that you don't run out halfway through. And also, the lunar lander would not have needed 3 days of oxygen because they did not spend 3 days on the lunar surface.
They believed those visible wires above the Apollo astronauts were only light reflections, and that the obvious vertical movie backdrops visible throughout the Apollo missions were actually real moon landscapes, despite the obvious line between the stage and the backdrop.
So why is it that whenever we see these so-called wires suspending the astronauts, there's only ever one of them? Never two like you'd expect there to be. I mean, these are fully grown people, and I doubt that one wire would be able to support their entire weight. And if they are using movie backgrounds or whatever you say they are, then why not try to fake your own moon landing using nothing but the technology that they had back then? I've never actually heard someone try to do it. That would be pretty good evidence, at least to me, that the moon landings were faked.
They believe that the alleged ISS spaceship, which most certainly looks like a kid's model, which was never assembled on Earth for testing, is actually falling perpetually at 17,000 miles per hour in the vacuum of space.
So no, Leo, the ISS is not an airfix model. No, Taboo Conspiracy, the ISS is not a model. In fact, people have taken videos of it going in front of the moon. Now, as for it constantly falling, yeah, physics does seem a bit counterintuitive at times, but if you know how gravity works, then all the physics does check out.
They believe that the unproven force of gravity from the moon pulls the oceans towards the moon but has no effect on anything else but the oceans. In addition to the alleged gravity of the moon pulling the oceans, they believe that the moon causes high tides on the opposite side of the Earth by causing the Earth to bounce, which bulges the oceans away from the moon.
So this is something where it's not just the gravity of the moon causing the high tides, it's also the gravity of Earth causing the high tides as well. And it is rather complicated to explain, so I think I'll leave a link to Baldy Cats trying to explain it so that you can watch that instead.
They believe that the bright moonlight that you can read from is actually a reflection of sunlight 234,000 miles away off of a dark gray dust ball, in total contradiction of the inverse square law of light.
Well, the moon really isn't that bright, especially when considering in the day when the moon is out, is not too much brighter than the sky. The only reason why it seems so bright at night is because it's really dark at night.
They believe in 19,287 space satellites, which are never photographed except for those ones attached to balloons.
Except, the ISS has been photographed by people on Earth going in front of the moon.
They believe that radio waves, VHF waves, sonar waves, radar waves, Lorentz and lasers all wrap around the Earth's curvature and can hop bulges of Earth and water hundreds of miles high.
Well, depending on the wavelength, refraction can affect it. There are also other things that can affect it if the wavelength is too long, although I don't know enough about that. There's also the fact that many communication towers are built with the Earth's curvature in mind.
They believe in the Coriolis force when it comes to field goal kicks, Foucault pendulums, and the direction of your toilet drain, but then want you to ignore the Coriolis force when you ask about Felix Baumgartner's balloon flight for 2.5 hours at an altitude up to 128,000 feet.
So, it is actually a misconception that Earth's spin affects the way in which toilet drains flush, because other forces are more prevalent there. But it is interesting that you bring up Felix Baumgartner, because I have actually calculated the amount of effect that Coriolis should have on that, and it was only about 13 kilometers. Now, the fact that he landed 50 kilometers to the east means that wind had much more of an effect than Coriolis.
Without question, the atmosphere evinces no properties of spin or being attached to the ground spinning 1,040 miles per hour, and to claim otherwise is stupid.
Try telling that to a meteorologist.
They believe that because the Earth spins, that the Earth is bulged at the equator, that the solid ground can bulge, but nothing else is affected by the rotation of the Earth and its centrifugal forces.
Well, if you spin a solid object fast enough, then it will bulge. And the centrifugal force does affect other things, like the weight of people standing at the equator compared to the poles.
They believe that commercial surveyors, engineers, snipers, radar operators, pilots, military professionals shouldn't have to take into account the Earth's rotation or the supposed curvature, because for some reason the Earth's rotation and the curvature evade all detection and don't actually need to be considered.
Well, that's only over short distances, but over long distances, then the curvature of the Earth does need to be considered. And the curvature of the Earth is considered by people that are building things over long distances.
They believe it's perfectly normal for a woman astronaut's hair to be sculpted into the Bride of Frankenstein instead of flowing naturally, like it would in a true weightless environment.
Well, different people have different hair, but when your hair is tied back, like in one of those clips that you just showed, it's not going to flow very well.
They believe that airplanes, regardless of speed or altitude, mysteriously tip their noses to automatically adjust for the mountains of curvature.
Well, actually, no, they need to point the nose up in order to compensate for this pesky little thing called gravity.
They believe the geometric horizon drops as an observer rises, but ignore the fact that the horizon did not drop one iota as Felix Baumgartner got to 128,000 feet.
Well, I've actually seen the horizon drop because when I was on a plane, I used a level to see if the horizon rises to eye level, and it doesn't. And you can't simply tell whether the horizon is rising to eye level based simply on a photo that has no indication of where eye level actually is.
They believe that the Antarctic Treaty and its enforcement protocols, which prevent all independent exploration below the 60th south parallel, was only instituted to protect the environment.
Well, yes, it is actually a very important place for scientific research, because most of the people down there are scientists.
They believe that it's just some strange coincidence that there is no north-south circumnavigation.
And I'm sure it's just a coincidence that Taboo Conspiracy just told a lie, because there has been north-south circumnavigation before, most recently by the One More Orbit crew.
They believe the alleged ball planet of Pluto coincidentally happens to have an unmistakable Disney Pluto dog on it.
Well, that's just a case of pareidolia. Happens all the time.
They believe that the first photograph of Earth in 43 years just happened to have the word sex spelled in the clouds. That's stupid.
Ah, I see that Taboo Conspiracy is much like myself and will laugh like a 12-year-old when someone mentions sex. Hehe, sex. But again, this is just another case of pareidolia. Seeing patterns where there are none.
They believe that supposed space rockets, like the space shuttle, arc and look like they're falling down only because the rocket is leveling out in space.
Well, rockets aren't just simply launched directly up, because that would be rather ineffective. Instead, they're launched at an angle. Most often, they are launched in the direction of Earth's rotation in order to retain the velocity of Earth's spin. And the appearance of the rockets arcing down is a combination of gravity affecting the rockets, as well as perspective.
They believe that you were accidentally created by rocks and ooze, and that life really doesn't exist.
Well, there are people that believe that the Earth is a globe, yet they don't believe in evolution or abiogenesis, like Kent Hovind, for example.
There's no such thing as life, really, that we're very complicated rocks. And we're a chemical reaction that got complex enough to become conscious.
Well, I'd say that she is correct, but that is getting deep into the philosophy of what does it actually mean to be alive.
They believe that a high-precision gyroscope, which retains rigidity in space, somehow automatically corrects for both curvature and axial rotation.
But what we found is when we turned on that gyroscope, we found that we were picking up a drift, a 15-degree-per-hour drift.
Thanks, Bob.
They believe that a volcanic plume, which can shoot straight up in the air, is somehow unaffected by the spin of the 1,000-mile-per-hour ground below it. That somehow the upper layers of the plume speed up to keep up with the lower levels of the plume.
Well, there's actually not that much difference in the height when you think about it. Let me try and explain it in very simple terms. Earth big, things on Earth small.
They believe conformity is a virtue, parroting is intelligence, and any statements outside the approved narrative must be censored.
Except, I proved in my last video on you that I don't think that parroting is intelligence, and that I instead think that problem solving is intelligence. And I also don't think that conformity is a virtue, because if I did, I'd be Christian. And to top it all off, I don't believe in censoring anyone, but I do believe in correcting misinformation, which is what flat earthers spew.
To be clear, I'm not calling ball earthers stupid, but their irrational, unproven, silly beliefs devoid of all evidence are certainly stupid.
That's ironic, considering flat earthers have irrational, silly beliefs that are devoid of all evidence.
And if you refuse to think for yourself and to investigate the flat earth with an open mind, that is stupid.
But why would anyone need to investigate the flat earth? Because it has been investigated by multiple people, and anyone with a rational mind has decided that flat earth is utter bollocks. But more to the point, we are 2/3 through a video titled, "What Does It Mean to Be a Flat Earther?" Now, he hasn't directly answered that question yet, but he has indirectly answered it with all this bullshit that he spewed in this video. So, what does it mean to be a flat earther as portrayed in this video? Well, it means that you misunderstand the globe, and in some cases misrepresent or even strawman the globe. It also means that flat earth isn't really about flat earth. As Greater Sapien once said, flat earthers aren't flat earthers, they are globe deniers, because there is no flat earth that can be defended. But with that, that is it for this video. Leave a like and subscribe if you liked this video, and be sure to click the bell notification so that you actually get notified of when I post new videos. As always, a big shout out to my $20 or more patrons. What Jesus, Hugh Jarsz, M.C.Nutkin, Jane Spade, Wolfie, Morrie, and the Friendly Antinatalist. If you want to support me financially, you can do so on Patreon. There should be a link there. But anyway, I will see you in the next video. Between you and me, thank you for watching.